Hi, my name's Kurt, and welcome to 7 Best Things, a positive look at pop culture. For this video, we'll be counting down the 7 best things about Spider-Man, the first film in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Please be aware, there are spoilers ahead. Before we begin, a few stats about the movie. Spider-Man was released in 2002 and directed by Sam Raimi. The character of Spider-Man was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. The screenplay was by David Koepp, the writer of Jurassic Park and Mission Impossible. The stars of Spider-Man are Tobey Maguire, Willem Dafoe, Kirsten Dunst, and James Franco. Spider-Man was made for a budget of $139 million and grossed $403 million domestic, number 1 for the year, and it grossed $821 million worldwide, number 3 behind The Two Towers and Chamber of Secrets. Spider-Man opened for a total of $114 million on opening weekend. This was a record for that time, a record that stood until 2006 with Pirates of the Caribbean 2. And now, on with the countdown. Number 7, Sam Raimi. James Cameron was an early contender to direct Spider-Man, and why not? He was at that time, and perhaps still is, the most successful director of all time. And from all accounts, he would have done a darker and grittier Spider-Man. I'm sure he would have done an amazing and fascinating version of Spider-Man, but I am so glad that Sam Raimi got this job. Sam Raimi turned out to be the perfect man for bringing Spider-Man from the comics to the big screen because Sam Raimi loves comics, and it shows. It completely shows in this movie. He gets the spirit of Spider-Man. Spider-Man needs to be funny, Spider-Man needs to be bright, and ultimately Spider-Man needs to be a really good guy. And Sam Raimi understands all of those things. He also loves horror movies, and that shows up here too. We see a lot of horror elements that kind of mix in with the romance and the comedy and the action. The transformation of Peter from boy to Spider-Man is intense, with skulls and spiders superimposed over Peter's face and spiders crawling in Peter's bloodstream. Peter doesn't hunt down Uncle Ben's killer. He stalks him, like a spider stalking its prey, dropping down from the ceiling, unnoticed in the shadows. It's part horror movie, at least for the criminal. Sam Raimi knows all the right elements to put into this movie. Part horror movie, part romance, part comedy, and part action movie. Number 6, web slinging. It's great to see Spider-Man being Spider-Man, swinging through the streets of New York. This is the first time watching Spider-Man swinging through New York that isn't a cartoon. We have come a long way from the 1970s Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man series. Credit goes to John Dykstra of Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica fame, who worked on the special effects on this movie as well as his team. New York, by the way, looks great here. It is straight out of comic books in the 1970s. I love the fact that they used the Flatiron Building as the Daily Bugle building. That's perfect. And New York itself as a character in the movie. It is Peter Parker's home, full of good people just like him. When the Goblin threatens Spider-Man and Mary Jane and the kids, it's the good people of New York who come to his defense. 9/11 proved that New York is full of brave heroes, ready to help out in a crisis. And that is acknowledged in this movie that came out just a few months after that event. By the way, there are great fight scenes between Spider-Man and the Goblin. My favorite is the Unity Day battle scene. I love it because Peter doesn't overpower the Goblin. He outwits him by disabling his glider. That is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is first and foremost a science nerd. Sam Raimi gets it all right, including the action. Number 5, the quiet heroes, Uncle Ben and Aunt May. You know, in my opinion, the real heroes of the Spider-Man story are Ben and May Parker. In the movie, it's never explained what happened to Peter's biological parents. The emphasis is that Uncle Ben and Aunt May raised Peter. Peter gets his superpowers from the spider, but he gets his super values from Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Aunt May is a picture of gentle goodness, beautifully played by Rosemary Harris. She is gentle but strong, and she is tough. She is resilient after Ben's death, and even resilient after the goblins attack. Feeling sorry for herself is not an emotion that May Parker will indulge even for a minute. She's smart and wise and tough. Cliff Robertson as Uncle Ben, well, is nothing short of iconic. Like May, he is good and gentle and strong. He is full of wisdom. Both May and Ben obviously love Peter with everything they've got. And Ben wants more than anything to teach Peter to be a good man. There are so many great scenes between the three of them, but my favorite, the one that has personally impacted me the most, was the car scene. Peter and Uncle Ben in Sam Raimi's signature 1973 Oldsmobile Delta 88. And Uncle Ben takes the moment to give Peter the benefit of his years of wisdom. He tells Peter, "These are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into." Powerful advice. It's because of May and Ben that this is not a horror movie. It's not the human spider. Rather, it's the origin story of a superhero, the Amazing Spider-Man. And of course, we can't forget Uncle Ben's most famous line, words that have resonated for an entire generation. Words we'll get to later on in our countdown. Number 4, Mary Jane. Peter says it best. This story, like any story worth telling, is all about a girl. Mary Jane is the central focus of Peter's life. It's why he does everything he does. Now, Kate Hudson was considered to play MJ, and Elizabeth Banks tried out for the part, but Elizabeth Banks was cast as J. Jonah Jameson's assistant Betty Brant instead. Dunst makes a great Mary Jane, the girl next door. Her blonde hair dyed to match MJ's trademark red locks. Mary Jane is, like Peter, a really good person. She's the one who asked the bus driver to stop and pick up Peter. The next time we see Peter try to get on the bus, Mary Jane has gotten a ride with friends, and then the bus doesn't stop for Peter. I think that implies that MJ stopped the bus more than once for Peter. My favorite Peter and MJ scene is right at the beginning, when MJ seems to smile at Peter and Peter thinks, "This is it. Finally, she notices me." And then we see, sadly, that she was waving at her friends behind Peter. I think that sums up Peter and MJ's relationship. Peter, his focus is totally on MJ, but MJ sees right past Peter. Now, the upside down kiss is an iconic movie moment of the 21st century, maybe the most famous moment of this entire movie. It looked great, but it was actually difficult for Tobey Maguire to film that scene. Remember, he is upside down, and they had to keep stopping because his nose was filling up with water. Acting is a tough business. Even the parts that look fun can be hard and uncomfortable. Speaking of great acting, let's go to number 3. Number 3, J. Jonah Jameson. In my last video, 7 Best Things About Iron Man, I talked about amazing examples of perfect casting. Bela Lugosi as Dracula, Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, Sean Connery as James Bond, and Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. I think I need to add one more to that list. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. J.K. Simmons perfectly captures the essence and character of J. Jonah Jameson. He's stubborn, decisive, strong, difficult, greedy, opinionated, and oh yeah, one more thing. He is absolutely hilarious. J.K. Simmons looks like he was ripped straight out of the comics and pasted onto Raimi's film. His scenes just feel right. When you watch this movie, you feel like you are in the bustling offices of the Daily Bugle. When I watched this movie again, I was surprised at how much I just smiled at every scene he was in. I could watch a whole movie of Jameson shouting orders at the Bugle. When Parker tries to tell him about Spidey's heroics, Jameson's not having any of it. Jameson retorts, "You take the pictures, I'll make up the headlines. Is that okay with you?" But, and here's the key, Jameson is not a two-dimensional buffoon. He's stubborn and opinionated, but he's a smart businessman, and he's tough. Most of all, and most importantly, he is a newspaper man, and newspaper men protect their sources. That's why in the scene when the goblin threatens him, he does not back down. He does not give up Peter's name, and he protects him. Simmons is so good in this role that when they rebooted this series, they didn't even have Jameson in the reboot. Why? Because no one could take his place. When they rebooted Spider-Man a second time, you know what they said? They said, let's just get J.K. Simmons back. That, my friends, is the definition of perfect casting. Number 2, Norman Osborn. So while we're talking about perfect casting, let's talk about Willem Dafoe. He is perfect as Norman Osborn, unsettling and intimidating even when he's trying to be charming. One of the most important parts of a superhero movie is having a great villain, and Dafoe as Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, is a great villain. He is genuinely scary, he is genuinely intimidating, and of course Dafoe plays his Jekyll and Hyde role with relish. He starts out somewhat sympathetic. Norman Osborn is a man who feels betrayed by his company, by his former wife, by the world, but his descent into madness is a fascinating one to watch. Raimi and Dafoe make a great team, both bringing those horror aspects of the Green Goblin to the fore. And the scene where Norman and the Goblin have a conversation in the mirror there is no other word for it. It is a masterpiece. It is a master's class in acting and direction. It was done without trickery or special effects. It's a result of Raimi's clever direction and Dafoe's magnificent performance. If I were running an actor's studio, I would just spend a whole semester on that one scene. Willem Dafoe gives one of the all-time greatest villain performances in movie history, and that's why he's number 2 on this list. Number 1, Peter Parker. I love JJJ in this movie, and Willem Dafoe is absolutely stunning as Norman Osborn, but when everything is said and done, this is Peter Parker's movie. Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, is one of the greatest heroes ever created. We can all relate to Peter, and we all follow along as Peter Parker transforms in this movie from nerd boy to Spider-Man. Peter Parker is one of the most iconic characters of the 20th century, and here at the beginning of the 21st, he's brought to life in a brilliant way. And I think we have 4 people that we can thank and credit for that. First, we need to credit Sam Raimi. He made so many great choices in this film. The style, the tone. He obviously loves Spider-Man, and it comes through in every scene. And one of the most important choices that Raimi made was casting Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, and he's the second person we need to thank. Now, James Cameron wanted to cast Leonardo DiCaprio. That would have been interesting. James Franco tried out for Peter Parker, ended up being cast as Harry Osborn and doing a great job. Jake Gyllenhaal also tried out. I'm sure he would have been great as well. But he would get his chance to star in a Spider-Man movie some 17 years later. Not as the hero, but as the villain. But as for me, I am so glad it went to Tobey Maguire. Maguire just nails it. He's absolutely believable as Peter Parker, super nerd. He is smart, likable, funny, a good guy, clueless around girls, and really insecure. He is definitely the focus of this movie. He is the one we follow through the movie, and Maguire gets us to know Peter, root for Peter, and feel for Peter. We feel it with Peter when he discovers the joy of his new powers, and we feel the shock and horror when Peter discovers his Uncle Ben has been murdered. Maguire brings Peter to life. Of course, we also have to thank Steve Ditko, who came up with Spider-Man's design and costume. Ditko's Spider-Man was not a perfect physical specimen like most superheroes. He was thin and agile and wiry. And of course that costume, one of the great designs of all time, the colorful red and blue with the black spider, has never been able to be replaced. It just says Spider-Man. Ditko designed that costume in 1962, and it has truly stood the test of time. But most of all, there's one man who deserves the most credit for this amazing character, and that, of course, is the writer, Stan Lee. Stan Lee invented a new kind of superhero when he created Peter Parker. Stan Lee is the genius who decided that a superhero doesn't need to be 30 years old or a billionaire or a square-jawed action hero. Stan Lee decided that any of us can be a superhero, even a high school nerd. And with that decision, Stan Lee changed comic book history, he changed the movie industry, and he changed our culture. Peter Parker became the hero that nerds like me could look up to and draw inspiration from. Peter is a guy who got bit by a radioactive spider and gets incredible powers. But that's not why we like him. We like him because even though he has powers, he has problems, he has dilemmas, he has relationship drama, and he doesn't always make the right decision, just like us. You know, in the movie, it's Uncle Ben who delivers that most iconic of all lines. It's Uncle Ben that teaches Peter his most important lesson, but in reality, it wasn't Uncle Ben who shared that wisdom with us. It was Uncle Stan, who taught all of us the most important lesson a superhero and any good person, any person who wants to be a hero, needs to remember. Stan wrote it in Spider-Man's first appearance, in Amazing Fantasy number 15 in 1962, and those words are as profound today as they were back then. What words are those? You know those words. With great power comes great responsibility. Well, that's all I've got. What did you think of the list? Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments below. If you get a chance, you can like and subscribe this video. Check out some of my other videos. That really helps me out a lot. And join the conversation. And if you get a chance, share with me your 7 best things about Spider-Man, or top 5 or top 10, whatever kind of list you want to come up with. I would love to read that. Thanks for watching today, and have a great day.